Hey guys, welcome back to the Tobacco Tin Book Club. My name's Jordan, I'm your host, and today we're talking about Chapter 2 of Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien. Right off the top of my head, it was a pretty good chapter. It expanded on the things that I enjoyed about Chapter 1, and it kind of gave me an insight into some things that I probably won't enjoy as much about the book. But right away, we start with dinner between Captain Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin. And the dinner reveals a lot about these characters that we didn't know at first. Um, so, you know, right at the beginning, we see that Captain Jack Aubrey is already making apologies for the food not being exactly how he wanted it. He obviously wanted, Stephen to have a good meal and for them to enjoy themselves, and they definitely did. But there's immediately a stark contrast between the two of them because this seems to be what Jack Aubrey is used to. And Stephen, he's not used to the food. He's not used to eating like this. And, you kind of see him at first not really wanting to get into it, but he says, I really appreciate the food and I don't see it as bad as if like you do. Um, but to Jack, when there's an inconvenience like that, it's a bigger deal to him because he's used to eating that way, and he's a bigger guy, so we know he likes his food. Um, but then as they're talking, we see Captain Jack Aubrey get a little bit vulnerable, and he kind of plays it off as a joke at first, saying, I didn't know you were in the medical field. It'd be so great to have you on my ship. Um, but he's just kind of like he's joking, but he's not joking. He's kind of trying to fish out and see exactly how Stephen feels about it. But then we see that Stephen also gets kind of vulnerable, and he admits that the reason he's not used to this kind of food is because he's not really doing great with money right now. He has lost his patient or his job that he was currently doing, and he doesn't have a place to stay. He lost his inheritance because the one that he had from his father, he's not able to write to his family or to write to any relatives or anybody else about this inheritance and this place he has in Ireland because of the war. And so we see that Stephen is also in a really low point in his life. And when Aubrey gets wind of this, he really kind of pushes harder to get Stephen to come on this voyage with him. And part of it is because he could use a surgeon or a physician on the ship, but also he is really starting to care about this Stephen guy and wants him to come on the ship so that he at least has a place to lay his head. Um, and so then, the dinner ends, and before the dinner ends, Jack gets this letter letting him know that he's going to have a Lieutenant James Dillon on the ship with him. And he's excited about it, and he mentions it to Stephen and says, "Hey, do you know this Dillon guy?" And Stephen says, "Nope, don't know him." But something's fishy about it, and we find out later in the chapter that he might know who this is, but we don't know their relationship yet. And so the next morning, it's pretty funny. We find out that Jack is up all night long, and he's just working out problems in his head, trying to solve issues that he knows he's going to have. As becoming a captain, he's got all these responsibilities that he's taking over, and he doesn't even fall asleep till 6 in the morning. And then, um, as he's getting ready to go to bed, all the other sailors are seeing him, thinking that he's just waking up, and so they want to make a great impression with this captain. And so they all get up extra early to start doing their tasks when Captain Jack's just finally starting to get to bed. And there's this funny moment where the carpenter is in his basically in his quarters hammering on something, trying to do a task, and the captain's trying to sleep. And he's like really, kind of pissed off that this guy's doing that early in the morning. But he realizes it's because they're trying to make a good impression. And so Jack gets up and he, the night before he was dealing with numbers and with the accountant guy that he has with him. In the morning is basically the same thing. It's all work, no play, just trying to get ready for this voyage. Um, and then he thinks to himself, I don't know why I invited that Stephen guy. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't even know him, and I'm going to have to stay next to him and possibly share quarters with him and spend lots of time with him for the next who knows how long. And he's a little bit worried about it because he doesn't really know this guy. He knows when you're staying close quarters with somebody like that, even the littlest things about them can get really annoying. Then we cut over to Stephen, to Mr. Maturin, and he's having a great dream where he's at, and all of a sudden he wakes up, and it really kind of touched me. It was very sad to listen to his story. Um, but he wakes up and he is so sad that his dream's over. He's so sad being brought back to reality, and he's like, just another day. He's upset that this is his life, and we find out that he was living in an old church that nobody was staying at because he, gotten into it with his landlord, didn't have enough money to go somewhere else. And we even find out that from the dinner that he and Jack had, he took some meat home with him to eat for breakfast. And it hit me because that's not something that Jack would do. Jack, he knows for sure he's got another meal. It might not be the best on the ship, but he's the captain. He's got a job. He's got an income. He's got a meal every single day, 3 meals a day probably. And Stephen has it totally different, and he thought to take that food home with him because he wasn't sure where the next meal was coming from. Um, and then we see, this side of Stephen that was really touching is he has it, really bad, and all these things are going on with him, and he's at a really low point in his life, but he's still taking the time to be so kind to animals. There's this one part where he's looking at a toad, and he doesn't get irritated that all these animals are inhabiting his space. There's ants running all around. There's other kinds of animals within his vicinity that he's sleeping, and he's not rude. He's not mad. He doesn't see them as pests. He even stops down to stroke this toad and to make friends with it, basically. But he starts to notice all these different things, the way he views the world, and you start to see a contrast between the way that Jack views the world, because he's thinking of things like the weather, thinking of things that would affect his daily life on a ship, while Stephen is thinking of things like animals that he notices, animal tracks, animal skins. He was focusing on a snake skin when he was relieving himself. He's looking at the ants, figuring out what kind of species they are. And they're just different people completely, but it's awesome to see that they became friends after such a weird conflict in chapter one. And as Stephen's walking along, he starts to remember that there's this James Dillon guy that's going to be on the ship, and he's got some bad feelings towards him. We don't know exactly what the issue was yet, but we know that there's probably some sort of conflict coming up that we're going to get into. And then we cut over to James Dillon. He's the lieutenant that's about to come on board with Captain Jack, and he's shaving, wanting to make a good impression. He's looking over the ship, thinking of what it's going to be like to sail on that ship. And then Jack and Dillon meet, and we realize, that they're probably going to get along pretty well. They're both very serious guys. They're both very capable, but there's not a friendship there. They're going to work together. There's obviously a hierarchy as far as of who's in charge of who. So there's going to be a camaraderie there, but I don't think they're going to be friends like Stephen and Aubrey are. Also, it was kind of interesting in the chapter that Stephen, a lot of what he's thinking about is caught up in his relation to Jack now. And Jack, for most of the chapter, he's very focused on his work. He's very busy, very very businesslike in the way he does things. Stephen, seems to be more emotional and more in tune with what's going on around him, and he's not as busy. So it was just another thing that was interesting. Another thing that was pretty cool is that Jack really took to heart what the guy told him in the last chapter about, wanting to be as economical and as savvy with money as he can be, because that's the easiest way to move up in the ranks. So saving the country money, saving the Navy money, and not bugging them about a bunch of things and trying to figure it out himself. So a lot of the times his crew is wanting to just go and charge things on credit or go and just have other people handle it, and he's saying, no, we're going to handle it. We don't want to get in debt, or we don't want other people thinking that we're a burden. You can tell he still wants to be seen as a great captain, and he wants to move up in the ranks even further. He wants to make sure he's doing everything correctly. So the rest of the day is basically him, planning things out, getting ready for this voyage, making sure they have all the supplies. He's trying to get new cannons on the ship, uh, just because he's envisioning taking prizes, taking down other ships, chasing them down. So he wants to get some chasers, and it ends up not working. And not everything is not organized yet. There's some sailors that are drunk. There's a situation where a bunch of the guys trip over each other when they're trying to set up the cannons. There's still women on board, but things do look promising. And so the ship ends up, going on like a day trip or going out and testing itself. And then, as the ship's leaving the dock, we cut back over to Stephen. And Stephen is looking for the Sophie, the ship, and the ship is sailing off. And all of a sudden, he's very worried that he's not going to be able to make it. And it was also kind of sad because this was like a huge thing for him. You know, for Jack, it would have been all right. Like he said, he would have been a little bit lonely not having a companion with him, but he would have gotten used to it. For Stephen, this was like a life changing thing. To be able to go on this voyage and to have a new job and to make money and to have a friend. And he even said, I don't think I could handle the disappointment of not being able to go on this trip. And he doesn't know that Jack actually sent sailors to the coffee shop to pick him up and to make sure everything was good. Um, but he didn't go to the coffee shop that day because he only had enough money either to get coffee or to take a boat to the Sophie. And he thought he'd have to do that himself. And we realize how much this means to him. And we realize, this is just a poor guy trying to make it. He's catching like a big break with Jack, and they become friends right off the bat, basically. And it's just like, it's really cool to see these two friends who are two men who are ready to fight each other become vulnerable with each other. And we don't see that in the world too often anymore. And Jack has his first meal alone on the ship. And he feels lonely, he's wanting a friend. So we see that like these guys are made for each other. They're made to be around each other and to be friends. And not every deep relationship has to be between a man and a woman. Women can be friends with women and men can be friends with men. And a lot of times those relationships are huge deals to us if they're true and they're real. And when two guys can overcome a conflict, they're usually a lot closer afterwards. But as Jack's doing his due diligence on this ship and trying to make sure everything's going to work okay and trying to test everything, the new cannons, he tries them out, they're not going to work. The ship is really not taking the recoil well. The carpenter comes out screaming and going crazy about these cannons are going to tear the ship up, basically. So he says, all right, we'll take the cannons back. And while he's trying to see how much speed this ship can pick up, something else breaks too. And so he has to go back to the dock, and he ends up, getting all those things fixed. And it was a good thing that Jack took the ship out to make sure that, these things were going to hold up. And the things that didn't hold up, he's getting them fixed. One thing that kind of stuck out to me that I didn't like was how in detail the ship stuff was. And I could understand why some people would love that. I grew up in the desert. I live in the desert. I've never sailed in my entire life. So the stories are interesting to me. The setting is interesting to me. But when it starts getting into the minute details of these ship parts, I kind of get lost. And it's not a huge deal because you just read through and you can pretty much understand what's going on. But this, as far as a naval story or nautical fiction, this is the most in-depth anybody's gone on these ship parts. And so I just kind of have to skim through those and do my best to understand. And so we end the chapter basically. Jack has gone back to shore to get some things that he wants for the voyage, things like wine, other foods. He doesn't want to be stuck eating what the rest of the crew eats the whole time. And he's with Stephen, and he's telling Stephen all these things, and Stephen is going to go get all his things. And then they both get back to the ship, and that's basically where it ends. He's telling Stephen to go below. He's getting all everything ready to take off and go on this voyage, and that's where the chapter ends. And I really enjoyed it. It was a really good chapter. It was very long. but it was good. And so I'm excited to, to continue reading and see where this story goes. Now we're on the ocean, and we're going to see what kind of adventures they find. Um, but as far as the story opening up and the relationship between Jack and Stephen opening up, it's been great so far. So I can see why so many people love this book, and I'm excited to keep reading it with you guys. I hope you read along with me. And, if any of you want to come on and discuss the chapters together, it'd probably be, very entertaining and lots of fun. And, um, or you can just write into the comments and let me know what your thoughts are about everything. And I'll see you guys for chapter 3. But so far, thank you for listening, and thank you for joining the Tobacco Tin Book Club. And I'll see you guys in the next video.